Hi, welcome back, or just welcome if it's your first time here. I'm Charlie. I write a blog called Candidly Rhubarb, and I mostly write about my experiences with recurrent miscarriage. I've recently decided to take the next step with that and to vlog about it. I'm very new to this, so be kind. And this is my second video in a series that I'm doing about my own personal experiences with miscarriage. I've been pregnant 8 times and 5 of those pregnancies have ended in a loss. In this video I'm going to talk in more detail about miscarriages number 1 and 2. So I was pregnant twice before I ever experienced miscarriage. They were both textbook pregnancies, resulted in healthy babies, Daisy and Ralph, who were born in 2012 and 2014. And I was never left with any cause for concern that something could potentially go wrong in the future. And we decided to start trying for number 3. Ralph was about 6 months old and we fell pregnant pretty much straight away. It never even really crossed my mind that anything could go wrong. There's always a slight niggling doubt. 1 and 4, it's not insignificant, but I think particularly once you've had healthy pregnancies, you just kind of assume that you're safe. So when I fell pregnant for the 3rd time, I was very excited. When I was 6 weeks along, we travelled over to Blackpool to go for a family meal because it was my dad's 50th. And we were actually so confident that everything was going to be okay that we told my family about the baby. We wrote in my dad's card, happy birthday, love from Daisy, Ralph and Bump. We were all happy, we were all excited, the news was out and it was all good. That very same evening, towards the end of the night, I had a sudden sharp pain in my stomach. So I went to the toilet and as I pulled my pants down I saw that there was blood in my knickers. It wasn't loads, but it was red. It was fresh, bright red blood. And I panicked. So we left pretty sharpish after that. We made our excuses and we left and we travelled home. In the car, we just didn't know what to say to each other, really. I remember the spouse said to me, "Are you okay?" And I said no. And that was about it. We just didn't know what was happening. By the time we got home, it was quite late. There wasn't really anything I could do at that point. I hadn't had any more bleeding or any more pain, so I went to bed and it was a weekend. So the next morning I called 111 and explained what had happened, and they got me an appointment at the out of hours GP. So I just was kind of thinking, it's nothing. It's, obviously you Google these things, you Google the crap out of these things, and there were so many people saying, oh yeah, I bled and it was fine, it's really common, it's totally normal. So yeah, I was just really hoping that that was the case. But yeah, I went in to see this GP, I explained what had happened, and he very, very casually just said, yeah, it sounds like a miscarriage. Wow. So obviously that was not what I wanted to hear. I was a bit lost. I didn't really understand why can't you help me? What can you do? What can I do? Like, please don't let this happen. And he was very much just like, there's nothing you can do. If you're going to miscarry, you're going to miscarry, that's it. He booked me in for a scan on the Tuesday and I just had to wait. On the Tuesday morning, I woke up and by that point I was bleeding quite heavily. I drove to Bradford Hospital. I had to go to Bradford because that's where the out of hours place had sent me, even though it's about 40 minutes from my house, so it was not the easiest place to get to. Bearing in mind as well, I had 2 young children and no childcare. We don't have any family close by, so childcare is always a big issue for us and has been throughout this entire process. So I went on my own. The kids stayed at home with the spouse. And it was only when I was in the waiting room that I began to get cramps. Up until that point, I think I'd really just about convinced myself that everything was going to be okay. So I went in for my scan, and they said they could see a sac, but there was nothing really else to see. There was no heartbeat, there was no fetal pole, there was nothing that they would expect to see at 6.5 weeks. But they dangled that carrot, and they said, you know, it could just be that you've got your dates wrong, so come back in a week. So that was harsh, really. I knew that I didn't have my dates wrong. I knew when this baby had been conceived, and I knew that I'd miscarried. But when you're in that situation, and when you know something terrible has happened and you really don't want it to have happened, if someone offers you a slight glimmer of hope, you grab it with both hands. And I did. I went home and I convinced myself really that this was a little miracle, and I was going to go back next week and everything was going to be fine. Of course, that didn't happen. I went back a week later and there was nothing there on the scan. So that was it. That was my first miscarriage. I sort of just wanted to go home and process what happened and move on from it, but it didn't quite end there. My hormone levels hadn't dropped. So they then began to talk about it being an ectopic pregnancy, but they then told me to come back in 2 days for another blood test. They told me to look out for any pain. I went home, and then I think either that night or the next night I had some really severe stomach pain just on one side. And I freaked out a bit, really. They talked about pain on one side and ectopic and how dangerous it could be. So I went to A&E, where they just sort of told me to go away because I went to the A&E at Leeds, because that's much closer to where I live. They said, go back to Bradford, that's where you're being treated. And yeah, it was pretty horrible. So I just went home again, took some pain relief. The next day I managed to get an appointment with my own GP and explained what happened. She did a pregnancy test in her office. It was still very much positive. So she called the hospital at Leeds and basically begged them to treat me, because travelling back and forth to Bradford with 2 young children was just not ideal for me. And I remember her saying, you need to remember, this isn't just a number, this is a woman who is miscarrying her baby. And I thought, yes, finally, actually, this has been going on for 2 weeks, and throughout this whole thing, you're the first person to really acknowledge that I'm a woman who is going through a miscarriage. I'm not just another patient, I'm not just a number on a sheet. She really kind of humanised me, and that really made a big difference to me. So I then went back to Leeds and had some more blood tests, and then went back a few days later and had some more blood tests, and then finally I was taken into a room with a nurse who said, your final blood results have come back and it is just a miscarriage. Which was an interesting way of putting it. To me, it wasn't just anything. It was devastation, it was heartbreak, it was confusion, it was shock. It wasn't just a miscarriage. I was okay, I think. Just sort of told myself, you know what, 1 in 4, we want 4 kids, so statistically we were going to have a miscarriage at some point. Let's dust ourselves off and move on from it. Started trying again straight away. Fell pregnant a month or 2 later, and I was still quite confident that everything was going to be okay. Everyone had told me, oh, it happens, just bad luck, no reason it would happen again. So I just didn't really think it would. I approached that pregnancy with a lot more caution. I worried a lot more. I checked my knickers a lot more. I overanalyzed every little tweak, every little pain. But ultimately I was still quite confident that we would be okay. Once I got past the 6-week mark and I hadn't had any bleeding or any pain, I relaxed. I took a big sigh of relief, and I really thought, yeah, we're going to be okay this time. I booked a private scan for 8.5 weeks. It was on Christmas Eve, and I went along to that, and I saw a perfectly healthy baby on the screen. Really strong heartbeat, measuring exactly as it should be, wiggling its stumpy little arms and legs around, and that was my third baby right there. Absolutely fine. Perfect. So I went home and we made our social media announcement that night. It was Christmas Eve. It seemed like a nice time to share the news. The sonographer had told me that the chances of anything going wrong at this point were around 1 to 2%. I figured, of course, well, you know, those odds are great. Obviously everything's going to be fine. A little scan picture under the tree and took a photo of that, and we told everybody that we were going to be having another baby in August. My NHS scan then came through. That was booked for when I was about 13.5 weeks. Over the next 5 weeks I kind of felt my bump growing. I even felt like I was feeling, you know, those very faint first little bubbles. I was totally convinced that that baby was continuing to grow and move inside me. When I went for my scan that morning, I said to the spouse, I'm really nervous. And he was like, why? And I said, I feel too okay. For the last few weeks, I've just felt okay. I haven't felt overly tired. I haven't felt really sick. I've just felt too okay. And he obviously thought I was completely bonkers and said as much. So we went to the hospital. We all went. The kids came as well. They knew about the baby. Ralph was only not quite 1. Daisy was 2.5. So Ralph obviously didn't have a clue what was going on. Daisy understood to an extent that she was going to be getting another little baby brother or sister, and that it was growing in mummy's tummy. So they came along to the hospital and they had to stay in the waiting room, because certainly at Leeds Hospital, children aren't allowed into the scan room. So I went in there on my own, and as the woman started to scan me, the screen was facing away from me, so I couldn't see it. And I sort of explained briefly that I'd had a miscarriage previously. I'd been for a private scan this time to check everything was okay, and it was. And she said, was there a live embryo at your private scan? Which, what a bizarre thing to say. And obviously instantly made me realise that there wasn't one there now. I asked her, is something wrong? And she just said, yes, I need to go and get someone else. And then she left the room. And I was just lay there on my own. It was one of the worst moments of my entire life. It just hurt so much. It was just such a physical pain. I couldn't believe this was happening again. She must have only been gone from the room for about a minute, but it felt like a very long time, and so many thoughts ran through my head. I mean, I'm not a big crier. The spouse would say I'm dead inside, which I suppose is not strictly true, but I don't it takes quite a lot to make me cry, except for like toilet paper adverts on TV, in which case I will cry like a baby. But I cried then in that room on my own. So she came back in with someone else and they took a look at the screen, and they told me that the pregnancy wasn't viable. And it was just, I couldn't believe that for 5 weeks I had been carrying around my dead baby and I had no idea. Not a clue. Not any pain, not any bleeding. The baby had literally died within days of that last scan. And I had no idea. And I think as a mum, that is a really, really, really difficult thing to process, because it's your job to protect your babies and keep them safe. And I hadn't done that. And I hadn't even realised that I hadn't done that. And that was so difficult to comprehend. They took us off into this little side room and they talked about what the next step was. I decided to have a D&C and we booked that in for the following day. And then we went home. And I had to explain to my 2.5-year-old that that baby brother or sister that was growing in Mummy's tummy wasn't growing anymore. I remember being upstairs with the kids and I could hear the spouse's phone ring and I heard him pick it up and he was sort of saying, "Oh, hi, yeah, you alright, mate? Yeah, good, thanks, you?" And I was so angry. I couldn't believe that he could just act like nothing had happened. And now, like, I look back and I realise, like, actually that's what everyone does. People get delivered this devastating news and then they go back to work, or they go on the school run, or they go and carry on with their day because you have to, and because nobody talks about it. It's just the unspoken thing, and that is what is so difficult about it. Anything else, any bereavement that you go through, any illness that you experience, it's very rare for people to keep it bottled in. But with a miscarriage, that's the common thing. People don't talk about it. And I hope that with this video, if it gives one person the confidence to feel like they can say, actually, I'm not all right, I've just miscarried, then good. Because we should talk about it. It's so common, it happens to so many people, and it should not be taboo. But anyway, that's a video for another day. The weird thing with this one was, as soon as I got home, I started to bleed. And it was almost like my body just hadn't wanted to accept what had happened. But then when it had been confirmed, it had no choice. So by the next morning, when I was meant to go into hospital, I just called them up and said, I'm bleeding, is it worth coming in, or should I stay home and do this naturally? First of all, she said, what name's it? I told her, and she was like, oh yeah, you're one of my ladies. Like I was literally going in for a wax and not to have my dead baby scraped out of my womb. Then she said, yeah, stay at home, get some pads, take some paracetamol. It's going to be like a heavy period. And I just accepted that because the first one it was exactly like a heavy period. So I just assumed that this would be the same. How wrong I was, and how angry I still am that I was left so unprepared for what was to come. And I know that I'm not the only one. I've spoken to several women since then who have been through something similar and were also told very casually, yes, it's going to be like a heavy period. And it has been horrific. Luckily, it didn't all kick off until after the kids had gone to bed. I had bled throughout the day, but nothing major. We put the kids to bed at 7 o'clock, and then not long after that, the contractions started. And they were full blown, they were real contractions. I'd given birth twice previously, and I knew what they felt like, and it was them. I leapt straight onto Google to find out what the heck was going on, and there were a lot of people on there who said, yeah, it's like labour. And it was. I contracted for about 2 or 3 hours. They got progressively stronger, closer together. They were very regular. And then at one point I felt like a little pop and then a release, and then the bloodbath began. It was carnage. With every contraction, it was gushing, pouring out of me. I ended up just lying on the bathroom floor, surrounded by nappies, because that's what we were using to try and stem the flow. With each contraction, I was either throwing up or passing out with each big loss of blood. And it sort of went on for most of the night. It was truly, truly horrendous. I didn't see the baby come out, and I think I'm glad about that. I don't think I would have known what to do with it. It was just such a mess. That was probably for the best. It took a couple of days to recover from that. I was left quite anemic, I was weak and dizzy, and just sort of had to take to my bed for a couple of days. So physically it was a really difficult time, and mentally it was even worse. It was by far harder to get over that one than it was the first. I think it was just, I felt like such a failure. Like, why can't I keep my babies alive? And why hadn't I known? Why hadn't my intuition warned me? Why had I had no idea what had happened? It was just such a shock. You go into your 12-week scan expecting to see a baby leaping around in there, and when someone just tells you there's no heartbeat, it's literally earth-shattering, and it's such a hard thing to come to terms with and to get your head around. And I really, really, really struggled mentally after that one. But yeah, like anything, you have to carry on. So that was my experience of my first two losses. They were both very different, physically, mentally, but they were both pretty horrible. Both very, very hard in their own way. But thank you for watching, again, if you have. And if you've got any questions, I think I've covered pretty much everything about them in this video, but if there's anything else that you want to know, or want to ask, or just want to tell me, you can message me on Instagram. I'll put the link in the description below. And if you head over there and send me a message, I will get back to you. Anyway, I hope to see you when I do another video in a few days' time, where I'll be talking about molar pregnancy. And thank you once again for supporting me in this and coming along to watch. See you later. Bye.